The sound of metal ripping apart yet, it echoes in my head, and my hands hold on to the steering wheel and the car turned out of control in the middle of a deserted road. There was no warning. There was no time to react. For a second, I was driving in the other world turned into a sound. Dry, heavy, heavy. The impact came as a sharp cutoff, and shortly after, the silence, the more daunting than I have lived. There was a silence so absolute that it seemed to swallow all my thoughts, my breath, my hope. Right there, in that moment, I knew for sure that no one would come in, none of the car. Any kind of help. Just me, trapped, injured, and with the smell of the fuel flowing in the air, and the feeling that this was my last moment of consciousness. The pain started to go up slowly, as if he were testing me. My body doesn't respond to right. My legs were fastened, and that every attempt has been made to move it was all turning you again. I was talking to myself in my mind, almost begging for someone to listen to anything happen to you. That's when a distant sound passed through the empty air, world news. Or, at least, I thought it would be. A part of me believed that it was a delusion, and that, to my mind, was making an exit so as not to let go. Anyway, I picked the one that sounds like it's the last real thing I had left. When the car door was opened by force, the light got me blinded for a few seconds. I did not see faces. Only the shadows are moving too fast. I heard a loud voice, steady, calm, in a way that was foreign to him, chaos, telling me to stay awake, to look out for him, and to rely on. As he pulled out, I could feel the weight of his body to me, protecting me, as if they were placing in me, and it's something that might blow up at any moment. What did not make sense at the time, but it hit home for me. It was not a bailout. It was a decision. The inside of the ambulance, it was fragmented. The sounds were mixed, the voices came and went, but that voice was still there, giving orders, refusing to walk away. Even without opening your eyes up, I felt the presence of him, as if it were a solid, steady, almost a family member. And that scared me. Why have I never seen this man before? Still, it's a part of me is starting to figure out that the meeting was not random. You don't know and explain why. At the hospital, and the coolness of the wall, and the white light has brought me back to reality. I was weak, but it did. I watched it all in silence, until you realized that he was standing still, looking at one of the medical records just as if you had found something that was not meant to be. The silence was louder than any words. I saw his face change, his breathing fail, just for a second, and your medical record to be closed down too quickly. I did not feel any fear for him. I became afraid of what he'd just figured out. It was then that I began to see that my last name was a weight that I never thought. A weight has always been around, but it's hidden in between the lines of my own story. When he came to talk to me about, the conversation was short and strained as he avoided my eyes, as if he were holding on to something that could not be said to you. I knew at that moment the silence was your choice, and some never come without consequences. From then on, everything started to change. The people at the hospital, they talked low, and when I went by, the doors were shut, eyes on me with them. I felt like I was being followed, even when no one else was saying anything. He was still close by, but far away in a different way, as someone who knows too much. The last look that we change before it's about to go out, I don't think that in the past. It was approaching way too fast, and I wasn't ready to hear it. He didn't know. You may already be feeling it right now. In this strange need to understand what it actually started out at the road ahead. Because of that night did not end there. It just opened up something that should not have been opened. And the next thing that happens is, when you all is no longer just an accident. While I do that, I know I'm not the only one who has felt this tightness in the chest. And this strange feeling that something is out of place, and you will never again fit into it. Maybe you've been in a time when everything moved at a time, without notice to you. And it was with this question, as an echo from the inside, without a response. If at any point you in the which I have told you so far, you included, write in the comments what you have felt. Don't need to explain it all to you. A phrase he says more than any of the long story. Reading this will create a bridge between those who are on the other side of the screen and the ones who are here to relive it all out. And this is the story I pinned it in some way. And if something in there was the restless, leave a like. It is not just an empty gesture. It is a way of showing that this is the kind of narrative needs to continue to exist. And that these stories need to reach other people who also carry the silence, the questions, and the scars will not be seen. Each of Tan pushed that message a little farther than I could do it on her own. Now, if you feel like you want to keep track of it until the end, then you need to know where all this is going to go if you subscribe to the channel, not as a duty but as a choice. As if to say, I want to stay here. I want to hear what comes next. It makes all the difference in this story. Please follow the living, make a new chapter. And to reach those who still don't know who needs to hear it, take a deep breath with me for a moment. Because from here, it will be taken into account in the way that you expect it to. And the one that started out on that road, it's still far from finished. I was there with shortness of breath and trying to figure out if I was still in the same world, or if he had already passed through some invisible line that no one gets to see it when it happens. Because then there's a noise after turning and after the impact. The one who came in was a silence that did not seem normal. It was a silence that pressed upon him. Not only from the outside, the road is empty, but it's inside of me also, as to my own thoughts were scared to make some noise and draw attention to it. The smell was the first thing that gave me panic attacks for real. Gas-powered vehicles. That smell of sour, heavy, going for the throat, even when I didn't want to breathe. And it's weird to talk about it right now, but at that moment, the smell seemed to be a countdown timer. As if the air were to me, saying it is not here, but I couldn't get out. I tried to wiggle your legs, and there was a hook that came up, and it exploded in pain. My body was trapped, kinked, plugged into a place that was supposed to be there. I thought I would scream, but her voice did not come out. I thought I'd pick up the phone, but my hands were trembling, and did not find anything. Only plastic, glass, and that the cold of the night, but on the skin as if it wanted me to delete it. That's when I had one of those internal decisions that we take. In seconds, and you only realize later the impact that I've stopped the fight in the car, and began to fight in my own head. My mind started to do what we do in the fear, invent the end, inventing the scenes, to invent complications. I saw myself in there, all alone, unseen, and will only be more of a story than anyone else's account. And it hurt more than the punch. It hurt on the inside, just the way that it changes the mind of a person without asking for permission. I've looked at the pro roof crumpled up in me, and I've tried to talk to you. Yeah, you're listening to me right now, as if it's your attention. It can go through all the time and get me to that road. I thought about the simple things, a desperate, almost a child. It's only someone, just pass a drive. Just a light, please, and when I say to you that I thought, well, it is not poetry. This is raw truth. This is the kind of truth hidden that we keep because it is a shame to admit that, deep down, what we want is to be seen in, to be found. It was in this vacuum that a sound came, faint, far away. Howling metal, but I was unable to identify the first time around. Built-in siren. In my head, I wanted to believe it at the time, but my body wouldn't let me. Because when you're hurt and alone, in the hope of becoming a dangerous thing, she can get it up for you, or you will break it again. So I don't doubt. I did it for the pain, command, and distrust. I thought that it was a delusion, that it was just my mind trying to give me an outlet so I don't go crazy. And yet, even so, I jumped at the chance, as those who hold a rope in the dark, not knowing if she's stuck in one place. The sound disappeared and came back, just as if you were playing with me. And I'm tortured. Because every time I thought I was closer and closer, it seemed to go away. I started to convince myself that I was just imagining it. Then I felt something else. The piece of the surroundings seemed to be alive. It wasn't just the absence of the car, the people of the light. It was a feeling that it was behind the scenes, that there was something beyond what I could see, as if on the road keep secrets, and I had fallen right in the middle of them. I know it may seem like an exaggeration, but it's the way that works for you when you are vulnerable. Everything takes on meaning, all of it is a sign, and the wind turns to you. My pain has increased. Not all at once, but in waves, as if each minute of charging me for a price. I've been trying to breathe in short. I don't feel it as much. I've been trying to stay awake because it's a part of me used to say that sleep was to give up. And I don't want to give up. Not that night, not in that way. I began to repeat in my own name in the story, as if it were an anchor. How can I remember who I was? I could prevent that. I have a gun in there. And the most frightening aspect of it is that, in the midst of it, and I realized that I was thinking about my dad. I don't know what it is. It didn't make sense. But it came out as a reflex action, as a reminder that there was a recall, only the weight up to chest. I thought about the things that are not said in the blanks in the conversation, in the way that some issues have always been banned, who had never been explained. And in that moment, I felt like I was all those things, at the scene. The silence, the smells, the solitude, it was only on the surface. As if the life I had been pushed to a place to where I was going to pull over in a revelation that he was always waiting for me. The sound of the horn came again, sharper. I almost laughed, but he went out. A cry trapped. I have tried to move your arm, and you felt your skin burn. I forced the head of the pro side, the bolts, and I've seen far in the distance trembling in the light, weakly, as if it were a lamp, dancing in the dark. In my mind, tried to make an account to be used as a powerful, it is real, it is real. Please let it be real, but at the same time, a fear of the newborn, and of those that no one expected. The fear of who would be coming in. The fear of being too late. The fear is that, even with the help of it, but something inside of me had changed forever. The light came slowly, and I could feel my whole body get tense, as if he was waiting for the next impact. Not a car, but that's life, and I've held your breath without realizing it. The smell of fuel, it seemed to be stronger. The sound of footsteps is not yet there, but a presence I've ever felt. And this is before I even see any of her face, which I don't think it's that night. It was bringing only distress. He was bringing about the consequences. The first thing I noticed was the car being played in a different way. It was not the wind. It was not the roar of my own breath. He was a force to be decided. You need to take to the door, as if the metal had no weight. No. The sound was dry, short circuit, and the light went for a time, and it's too strong, filled with everything that my eyes could see. For a few seconds, I couldn't see the faces. I saw the uniform. I didn't see anything that I could reassure you of the truth. Only a silhouette cut out against the dark one in stark contrast, between the night and to the point. Before they even understood what was going on, a voice came into my head, strong, low, control, quiet, too, for that scenario. And that's what is most confused me. Because when everything is broken down from the inside and from the outside, the last thing you expect is for someone who talks as if he had gone through this many times before. He said my name, not to him. He has not shown in a hurry. He said, as if trying to pull me back to the present, as if it were me, by standing there. Look at me, stay with me. And then, without realizing it, and I obeyed. I felt a strong hand strong, but very careful, holding on to my arms. Assess quickly where to touch. Every move seemed calculated, as if he were taking critical decisions within seconds. And it gave me a strange feeling of safety and security, in most cases. As if someone had taken control at the very moment that I was no longer able to decide on anything. At the same time, something inside of me, according to, do not fear, not a suspicion. It was something else, an uncomfortable quiet, which is difficult to explain. Such as when you realize that the situation is bigger than it looks, even with no understanding of behind the scenes. When the time came to pull me out of the car, it all happened too fast. The smell of the fuel, it was more of a strong, almost overwhelming. And I heard someone say something to you about the risks, about the leak, loose words that don't fit right in the back of my mind. It was only then that I realized what he just did. Before I get to move out completely, he stood between me and the car. His body was turned into a kind of shield or a gesture, instinctive, automatic. and how you can protect yourself someone to be a part of who he is. It is not a decision-making meant to be seen. What struck me more strongly than any physical pain, because no one does it quite by accident. No place will have to be prepared for the impact. As long as I was taken away, I could feel the cold of the night and hit directly on the skin, mixed with the warmth of his body so close by. My heart raced, not only due to the fear of it, but the strange clear that this man was not ordinary. Not the way we normally use that word. There was something in the posture, in the way that he watched all around, keeping the focus on me, as if he was looking at the layers that I couldn't see it, that messed with my mindset at the time. It has changed the way I understood what was going on. That wasn't the only one to rescue. It was a series of decisions being made in silence, with an impact that I was not able to be measured. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak and broken, almost non-existent. Even so, he said, as if I could hear from the inside out. He used to tell me to breathe slowly, to trust, to let him take care of the rest. And that the word trust, it was an echo, because they rely on someone that you just know from that state. It is not rational, it's an instinct. It's the delivery. This is the kind of thing that changes the entire person without asking for permission. As I walked away from the car, I saw the glare reflecting off the metal crumpled. I heard the crack of something that was hanging off. I could feel the body. It will lead me away before anything worse could happen. It was at that moment that I did, without thinking that the meeting was not an accident on the road. There was a connection. An invisible form, there's something that is on the words not to explain this to you. A silent connection, built in the midst of the chaos. It was a truth hidden, are still far from being known. I lay down on the table and feeling the world go around. But there was now a constant presence by my side. It was still there, keeping an eye out, looking at every detail, as if I was keeping most of my physical health. And as the ambulance began to move, with the lights glistening in the dark on the road, I realized that the rescue was not just for me, taking the accident. I was pushing for a change that I have not yet had the courage to name it. Something that had been active during the night, without even knowing why. I felt that some of the revelations have already begun to move around too much before, and I was ready to face them. The inside of the ambulance, it all came apart. It was not a power, but it also wasn't full consciousness. I was in and out of me as if I were walking through a door that wouldn't close right. The sounds came first, and after they went away. The voices were mixed to the sound of the engine, the radio sizzling, my heart beating way too fast. In a few moments, and I had the sensation of floating. On the other, to be secured by the weight of the body, and the pain that came every time I breathed in the background too. Still, one thing has remained constant, his voice. I've heard the orders being given to clear, without any hesitation, as if every word had to be used before the situation happens. He was talking to all the first responders, correct movements, the anticipated decision. At one point, someone suggested that he should go away, that it had taken her in the face. He refused to do so. Don't raise your voice. Didn't argue. You only said it would be. I went through a strange way, as if I was hearing something that was not just about me but about me. I have tried to open his eyes again. I saw only the lights from passing to fast, the shadows moving, the hands of adjusting the equipment. And even without being able to focus on the face of it, I could feel a presence there, the next, almost dark. As a professional in the distant in compliance with the protocol, but as someone who's had a personal reason to not get off my hand. This perception does not come from a rational manner. It came as a sense undesirable, such as changing the mindset of the people, without asking permission. There was a moment where he said my name again. Don asked to confirm. He said with ease, as if he didn't know. It made me frown even with his heavy body. I thought that maybe I had heard wrong, that my mind was just filling in the gaps. But the feeling remained. He was talking to me as if you understand my limits, as I knew that I couldn't stand to listen to. When you want to silence her when she needed a short name, so I didn't lose it once and for all. It was as if there was a map of the invisible among us, which was designed prior to that night. This was the first discomfort of the real one. It's not the physical pain, but from the awkwardness, because of the meetings and so do not make sense at all. When you look at it from the outside, people do not behave in this way are unknown. And I know deep down that he had no other way to get to know me. Even so, everything about him told me otherwise. Each and every decision that he was taking seemed to be charged with the care. But it is also more difficult to set up as a liability in advance, as if that ransom had a major impact on the saving of a life at the road. While the ambulance is moving forward, and I felt my body relax a little bit, and have told many of my own mistrust, part of me wanted to give in to the fatigue and delete it once and for all. The other party kept on the alert, looking at the little details and the tone of his voice changing slightly when he spoke to me. The way he leaned in to listen to my breath and the silence that was when someone referred to the hospital. In these scenes, these aspects, they began to join in the inside of me, like pieces of a puzzle that I didn't want to ride it. In the midst of it, the thoughts popped up in any order. The fragments of the past, pictures of my home, and my dad sitting at the table in silence. The questions that were never asked. It was strange, as it would be on my mind at the moment, without the call. As if the situation was pulling the threads of old, bringing to light a truth that hides it, which has always been there, but I tried not to be too handle. I have tried to dispel those ideas and to focus on the now, but they were as if the night had decided to mess around on it all the time. There was a time in which our own hands have touched it by accident. It was not an act dramatic. It was fast. It was almost inaudible. Even so, I felt a mild shock, do not power, but to recognize it. An impact to a quiet house. I asked, still confused whether he feels the same, or if all of this was going on in my head wound. The question was held up with no response, just the way things tend to be. The ambulance slowed down, and I realized that the sound we were getting. He leaned in a little closer to him and he told me I was safe now. The word now, he was continuing. Because it seemed that the security was within. That is, that the sequence of decisions, and he carefully, almost intimate. It was a part of something that you do not end there. I had no proof, only a certain uncomfortable growing in his chest, that the meeting was not random. And as I was coming in on a day that is not dependent on more than just my choice, when the door began to open, and the movement grew up around, and I felt his body drift away for a little bit, but the note was still there, the firm, following each and every step. It was during that period, among the litter from being kicked in, and the lights in the hospital, to me, means that I don't think that's something I had started. Not an explanation, not an answer, but it's a process, a transformation from quiet, which was built in the behind the scenes of that night. That was still far in the show, all is revealed. In the hospital, I received a message that is different from that of the road. It was not the cold of the night, nor of the island. It was a cold organized and cleaned up the other, almost in awe. The white light to me were directly, without ease, as if there was no room for shades inside of it. The smell of antiseptic was so strong that it seemed to want to erase any trace of what had happened to him before. As if one environment is to have the power to rewrite everything from scratch. I felt like I was a small, displaced, pushed through the hallways that I belonged to. As long as my body tried to keep up such a pace that in my head, it had not yet been reached. I was weak, and that was undeniable. Every movement seemed to demand a trade, internal, and each breath was accompanied by a careful, almost too much. However, I was well aware of, perhaps more so than ever before. Because when we go through something that almost takes away from the scene, something changes in the mind. The note is sharp. The eye begins to seek the meaning in which they would live. I watched it all in silence. The steps in a hurry, the looks, the technicians, the words spoken by about half. And then, in the midst of this movement, the whole of it. When I saw him, stopped motionless, as if time had decided to comply only to the area around it. He was holding a record in his hands, but it didn't seem to be the only book. It was as if he was absorbing something, It is as if each line of carrying a burden that should not be there. His face was serious. Too much. Too hard. Too much, too. And the silence that enveloped drew more attention than any sound around you. There was no rush. There was no confusion. There was a merger. And it made me uneasy. As the doctors came in and out, while one was appropriate gear to be on my side, and he remained there, still, as if it were the face of a decision that no one else saw it. I've tried to draw your attention to a movement to a minimum. The sound is weak. But he didn't even realize it. Or he realized, and he chose not to respond. This possibility was instilled in me as a doubt that annoying. Because, up to that point, he hadn't been aware of each and every detail in my book. Right now, she seemed far, far away, stuck in something that was happening in it. It was in the interval of silence that I felt a shift inside, as the story would have changed the direction of it without notice to you. Nothing is explicit. It had been said that nothing had been revealed to him, but something had happened to you. I could feel it in the air, in the way that the atmosphere seemed tense around him. For the record, that object is simple, the ordinary, became a symbol and awkward. I began to wonder what it would be written there in order to cause that reaction. First name. Your data. The information can, in theory, would mean more than the facts. Still, something is there. It had an impact. I thought of my last name. This is by no means clear, but as a reflection of you, as if the one word that has always been with me, and I had just won a whole other dimension. I've never thought too much of the stories of the members of my family. I never went searching for answers that I have provided. I've always thought that some things just were. But in that moment, watching the silence of his reach, I felt that perhaps there is more truth in a hidden attached to me. That's something that was on the sidelines for too long, and now he was played by mistake. He closed the chart and slowly. It was not a gesture as sharp, but it has been a permanent basis. And when he lifted his eyes, something had changed. He was not to blame. He was not afraid. It was a voltage to the website, such as who has to figure out who is involved in something bigger than they ever imagined. Our eyes crossed for a second and I saw it there. A decision which was taken in silence. Didn't know what it is. Only he knew that this decision was not easy. He reached out again, but there was a distance that is different now. The voice, when he spoke to me, it was controlled too much, as too much. He asked me how I was feeling as if I were in compliance with the protocol. But that's the look, he's another thing. I told him the way I did it, and I could tell he was paying attention to every word. Not the content, but because of what they hide. As if he was trying to confirm something that he knew at the time. The hospital was still running around, oblivious to all of this. For those who went through the hallway, I was just another patient. For those who clicked on a bookmark or give a one-time, he was only an agent with a customer. But there in space, invisible, among us, something that was actually being rearranged. A journey of the silent had begun and made up of small decisions. To rest, calculated from the revelations continued. I realized that the silence, it wasn't empty. It's loaded. It was the kind of quiet that comes before it changes. It sets the stage for the impact that it still does not show up. And as I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to collect my thoughts, I felt that the night was far from over to me. Because that's all he could see in that chart was not there. Still on the paper. He had crossed the room and had it installed in the environment. And now he walked with me. And even I didn't know exactly where he was going. When he turned back to look at the file, I noticed the change before you even understand the reason why. It was not wide open. There was no overreaction. But his face is closed in a way that wasn't there minutes before. His jaw was rigid, and his eyes took much longer than usual, about the same number of lines. And the breath he denounced all. Non-accelerated in a visible form. But he's lost the one measured pace than it had been long on the road. It was then that something inside of me shifted. He closed up the charts fast. Not in a hurry, but with a sense of urgency. As someone who quit a subject prior to that, he has to escape. The dry sound of the paper being echoed more loudly than he should in that white room. and I felt a shiver go up by the arms. He was not afraid of him. It was clear right away. He was afraid of what he'd just found out, and he had not yet put it into words. Afraid of what that information means to me, though I didn't know what it was. I watched in silence, trying to keep his face neutral, but inside my head, he began to work in a different way. It was like a piece of old have been brought to a place of forgotten about in the back of my mind, a sense of recognition memory. I thought of my last name almost by accident, as an automatic reflex, as if the word had been triggered by something external. It always has been just a name to me, something that I would repeat it without thinking, which was signed at the end of the forms. He carried on without question. From that point on, it ceased to be neutral. I realized that I never asked too much about the story behind it. I have never felt the opening to do so. Certain of the matters in the home, they've always had a weight, a stranger, an invisible line that is not crossed. My father has always been present, but distant in a way that's hard to explain. There was silence, too long. The short answer is too many. The decisions could not be fully explained. At the time, I'd call it a personality. Right there, in that room, I've got to call it something else. The sheriff took a deep breath before speaking to me again. With a gesture, a small, almost imperceptible, but it is loaded from the intention to do so. He chooses every word. It was self-evident. He spoke with me in a way that is polite, professional, but there is a caution to new, carefully strained, as if he were treading on unsteady ground. And as he spoke, and I noticed that his attention was only on me, but that's all that this conversation would bring. Behind the scenes, invisible moving on, while I was still trying to grasp onto the stage. It was at that moment that I could feel the transformation happening inside of me. Not a sudden change, but a scroll-silent mind. Sure that same night he was not moving, just with the present, but rolling with something much more ancient. I had exams, had not the facts. There was no one in the congregation on the ground. Even so, I didn't know. I knew from the way that we know when something is important to start to make sense. It's hard to ignore. In the background, in a different way. It was not the fear of an accident or fear of immediate pain. It was a fear of a deeper, more difficult to name. The fear of looking behind you and you have to find something that's always been there, waiting for the right moment to appear. The fear of realizing that the decisions made in the past, a decision that was not mine, had to have a direct impact on who I was living with right now. A word on the journey, he passed over my head, but not as something that is beautiful or inspiring, passed as a warning. The house is bypassed look at me for a long time. At a time when our eyes crossed each other, it was just too fast, as if he was in policing, that confirmed something that's inside of me. He knew more than he was willing to say. And in that silence, it was not a casual one. It was a conscious choice, a decision in that moment, right there on the side of my bed, and the record closed on the hand. A decision that I was not going to protect anyone else for a very long time. I tried to concentrate on my breathing. The beep tone is far removed from the apparatus. The sound muffled from the hospital to function normally in the outside world. It all looked the same, but nothing is the same. It felt kind of like being at the center of something that was beginning to move on, even without a fuss. The gear of the old Rusty is finally turning. And I did, to be a part of it, whether we want it or not. As he staggered back a few steps, talking to someone on the outside, I was left alone with my thoughts. And he was right there, in that interval, that is. The figure of the father came back with more force, not as a reminder of love, but as a question, as a silent presence looming over it all. I didn't really think about the accusations. Not on the finger of blame. I thought of the truth is not told. The stories are incomplete. Things that will change the way people see those who have always been close. There's nothing to explain. No such revelation came from the fact that, however, the impact was already there, which is installed. I felt as if that name, which always carried no weight, I have plenty of time to gain a new meaning. And from then on, they would no longer be able to pretend that it didn't matter. The one time it did not end anything. On the contrary, it opened up a space to be uncomfortable expectation of quiet, which he started to grow up without asking for permission. And while I've been trying to organize everything that's inside still lying in that white room. And I was just wondering if you have what are you listening to right now have ever had that kind of feel to it. That a small detail can change everything. If you are touched in some way, write in the comments is a simple sentence that represent how did you feel when you realized that some of the truths only reveal themselves when you least expect it. He came back a few minutes later, the same step ahead of you before, as if nothing had happened. But I've realized in time that it wasn't true. Of the body to repeat the gestures of the old ones, but these changes did not manage to be hidden. He walked over to the bed and asked me how I was feeling and made observations in an objective, almost to the business. The voice was still calm and controlled, but there was a distance there that wasn't there before. On a new layer in between us, invisible but very dense. Our conversation was short-lived, not for lack of subject matter, but due to the excessive care. Each sentence seemed to pass through a filter before they get out of his mouth. He avoided my eyes, and with an accuracy of confusing, staring at the screen for the door to anything that isn't in my face. And as much as he avoided them, the more clearly was, to me, that something was being restrained. Was not the mess. It was not doubt about it. It was a choice. I asked a question of simple, almost innocent. Something that, in another context, it would have no weight to any of them. He answered way too fast, like someone who had already rehearsed the answer inside. And it was then that I began to understand it. Not because he had said something wrong, but because you have said is right too. The type of response that terminates in a subject even before it starts. A close, careful, and definite. The silence that came after that was more telling than any of the long explanation. What struck me with the force. Because up until then, everything seemed to be the result of chance, of accident, of a sequence of unlikely events. At the moment, it's not. From that point on, it became clear that there was information being put on hold. And the information is retained when you take a risk, when you have an impact, when you change your decisions. In the silence, it was no longer just uncomfortable, and it went on to be a strategic error. I felt a strange mixture of gratitude and longing. Part of me wanted to believe that he was trying to protect me. The other part, to be more aware. She realized that the protection and control and at times go together. And when you are walking together, there is always a price. Don't say, but charged for later. The surrounding environment was still the same equipment and running. People walking by in the hallway, the daily routine of the hospital, following the indifferent. But inside me, something that was reorganizing. The conversation short has changed my mindset is more than an accident. Because of physical pain, you can learn the names of the measure to take care of. What I was feeling, it was different. It was the feeling of being free, of a truth it hides. And that, in itself, is already a game changer. It creates an expectation that it is constant. An alert is built in, a state of mind that it won't shut off. He shook hands with a gesture, implied, and saying that he would be close by if I needed to. The words were right, but it's the subtext was screaming. Would you be there to watch? To keep up with? Maybe not to step in, if need be. And when he came out of the room and I didn't feel relief, I felt the opposite. I felt that a line had been crossed and that, from then on, there would be very simple. I stared at the closed door for a few seconds, trying to figure out the real impact of this choice shown. Because in silence, and you also are making. And the decisions that shape our destinies, even when no one notices at the time. I started to think about how many times in life there are certain things that have been cast aside in the name of peace, from the appearance of a normal distribution, with the idea that it was better not to mess around on what seemed to be resolved. And I wondered how many of those choices were still in motion, and now under the covers, and I have no control of them. The name of the Father came back to my mind not as an indictment, but as a question mark in it. Is a constant, discreet, but it's impossible to ignore. I had no evidence. He had no new facts. Just the belief in knowing that the silence of the sheriff, he was not alone. It was connected to something bigger, older, more profound, with a network of decisions made long before I understood what it could be, affected by them. As I stood there, listening to the repetitive sounds of the hospital, I felt that the story was unfolding slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. And maybe it's just the same when the target comes into play. It does not run. It is not a force. It just moves on. And the one who is in the middle, only to realize later that you've been involved with. While I was there all alone again, staring at the white ceiling and trying to organize anything that hadn't been said, I got a funny feeling about the company. It is as if, when you talk about it right now, I'm reliving all alone. The stories just aren't meant to be saved. They need to have someone on the other side. A person who is willing to stay and listen until the very end, even when the silence is stronger than all the words. Maybe that's why I'm still talking to you. Because when someone chooses to stay, and when you decide to follow a story, one that fails to deliver it all at once, something that creates itself in there a going concern, an invisible thread that connects to the one who listens. And if you feel like you want to embark on this path with me, what do you want to be present when all of this is revealed slowly? So it makes sense to stay here, to follow closely. Don't get lost in the middle of the day that is still being made. Some of the stories, they require constant attention. They don't seem to be resolved quickly. Don't be explained in a few sentences. They are constructed with a long, slow, with a choice of silent, as has been done in that hospital room. And who decides to accompany them up to the end? It ends up being understood in more than the story itself. It ends with the understanding of the self. I still stood there, trying to breathe calmly. I have a feeling that the night had been something that could not be broken. And while everything seemed to be quiet, the other on the outside, on the inside, I knew what I was going. When the room fell silent again, no footsteps, no voices. Across the hall, I felt that silence was not a pillow, it was an invitation. An invitation to bother to look into the things that I've always kept organized. 2, for not to be touched. My father came to my mind without any effort, as if he had been waiting for that as well. Not as a reminder of a specific, but as a constant, such that the shape of the house, without ever sitting down at the table to talk to. At home, there are certain questions that have never existed. Not because it was forbidden, but because they simply did not find a place. It had a momentum of silence, a kind of implicit agreement that some things have worked better if they stayed the way they were. I grew up learning how to respect the rhythm, don't stress. You accept the short answer, as if they were full-time. That turned into our minds. One way to get through the day without causing any cracks. Up to that point in the evening. Because when you lose it all within seconds, you start to realize just how much he lived in accepting the bare minimum. And swallow it after I explain it to you. And it's nothing as if they were truths outright. The accident was not just a physical impact. He had broken up with a built-in logic that I used to carry it without realizing it. It was as if a door had been kicked in by accident, revealing a dark corridor that had always been there, but I've never had the courage or motivation to explore. And now that I had seen before, it was impossible to pretend that she wasn't there. It scared me more than any diagnosis by a physician, because the pain of the people comes to medicine we take, the hurt the people, the seem allowance. But what do you do with the feeling that your whole life may have been mounted on top of the silence? I've got to revisit 3 small scenes from the past, the ones we keep no matter. Conversation stopped when I came into the living room. The looks exchanged between the adults, and I don't understand it at the time. The way my dad was atone when the phone rang in the afternoon. Decisions to be taken without further explanation is always justified as necessary. It's better like that. Sophia, you still don't get it, then we'll talk. I remember listening to it and accept it, because it was easier to believe that there was a just cause in the face of the possibility that I was being kept from the outside world. And it's the most curious thing is that I had never, ever called it weird. I'd call standard in their daily routine. In the way of family, it's just the routine. And when viewed from the rear, Sometimes it is the only rack is securely mounted. And when a cabinet falls, you will find that the story you believed in a living was the only part they left you. Watch out! It felt kind of like being in the midst of a transformation of a culture. The most dramatic change that people get out of it, but it's a change in the internal, which is slow. It moves in the way in which we interpret everything around them. The accident that had acted as a trigger, a boost to the unexpected, that she took the control out of the hands of those who have always had it. I was beginning to understand that some of the revelations did not come because someone decides to tell you. They arise when the structures that support them will fail. When a name appears in the place of the wrong, when a look for changes, when the person closes the paper quickly, as if it would erase what you have read. The most troubled was not imagining anything wrong with it, but realized that I will never have. How many decisions have been taken by me, and I to know? How many choices are out of my life, and followed the paths drawn before I even have to say? These questions did not come out of anger. They came up with a different kind of impact, and the most profound, the most difficult to explain. An impact that can change the way that we see in the story. Because I went on tour without realizing it, so I can't have you all been saved and not know it. And in this case, it will be free for what? I've been trying to remember my dad at the details of the common, so as not to leave you, my head goes to the findings. He's making the coffee. He's driving with one hand on the steering wheel. He is being kind to strangers. He is saying a few words, but fulfilling that promise. It's just that, while at the same time, I remembered, also, the weight that had existed around him. He was not aggressive. He was in control. It was a feeling that there was something being measured by something, which is calculated as if it were alive and makes decisions that no one saw it. I didn't know if it was a guard or a strategy. And maybe it's just that this is the point that sometimes the difference between a secure and hide it's only in the intention. And the intention of it is revealed to you. I felt as if the night had shifted the axis of it all. What seemed to be an accident, and isolated right now, was making the outlines from the very beginning. Don't answer, but of the process. As if I'd stumbled on the truth hides that have not yet appeared in its entirety, but since it required some attention. And it gave the story a different tone, almost a conspiracy, not in the sense of exaggeration, but the direction the human race. When you realize you don't know about all of the layers in your own life, you will start to see signs of it everywhere. A nurse who hesitates before talking about his last name. A person in the hall who looks at you fast and turneth away. A door that is closed with a rush. The little things, too small to prove anything. But it is large enough to depower in the sense that there is a back going on without you. The hospital went on with his routine. The mechanics may not be aware of my thoughts. The people they pass through the hallway, carrying all the stories, other trade secrets, and other days off. And I was there, standing on the understanding that the mind had not been interrupted. It was rerouted. What lay ahead was not dependent on just answer with the outside. It depended on the willingness to face whatever was left out of the scope of the questions. Because there comes a point when you realize, continue to ignore it is also a decision. And decision-making, they will sooner or later take its toll. I still didn't have names, facts, or explanations. The only certainty is growing that the open door does not shut on her own. And that, at some point, someone would have had to go through it. As long as I breathed deep, trying to calm the inner turmoil, I realized that what I was feeling, it wasn't just fear. It's the awareness that some of the revelations don't come crying. They will come in silence, and when they do notice, they are already inside of you, moving it all out slowly. If at some point in your life you have felt that a situation is common and that was only the surface of something bigger than themselves, writes in the comments saying, I, too, have felt that there was something behind it after a while. I began to notice that the hospital is no longer responded to me the same way. At first, I thought it would be the thing on my head, the effect of the fatigue, the pain, and in the excess of his thoughts. But it's the repetition of turns print into view. The doors which before they were open, they became close, and when I was brought down the aisle, The conversations that were taking place normally cease at the moment when I approached, as if someone had tightened a button that is invisible from the rest. No one seemed to be hostile. No one seemed to be too nervous. It was something much more subtle. The adjustment of behavior. Careful, that was not me, but around me. The looks have changed. Were they not those who are curious or do not believe? They were quick, rating, including a moment too soon. The people who did not have any reason for me to notice seemed to be aware of my presence even before I see them. This created an uncomfortable and hard to explain because it was not a mistake. Of course, there's an attitude that could be called into question. That was all right too. And when it all goes right, too, something that is often that it is being controlled from behind the scenes. I felt like I was going through a space that had its own rules that I hadn't seen before. Each movement of my hospital appeared to generate little effects on the chain. A nurse was changing the route. Doctor lowered his voice. A phone would stop ringing, close to the other. That thing which is least freestanding, but both of which together create a feeling of persistent surveillance. Not in the sense of an explicit, to be followed, but in the sense of the hassle of being considered. It was against this backdrop that the house has continued to the present. Not to stuck it in me. It is not obvious, but it is always close enough to be noticed. He was there when I woke up. I was in there when someone came to talk to me. I was there even when you don't want to be in. At the same time, there was an emotional distance clearly. He was serving in the role of precision, but not in the same vicinity as silent as before, as if he had backed off a step across an invisible line. The contrast caught my attention. Because of the presence with no proximity, it is not taken care of. This is the note, and that's a game changer. I began to realize that he would talk less of me and more to do with other people. It's always in a low voice, always just out of my hearing range. There was no tension apparent in these conversations, but there was serious about it. The kind of safety that comes with the decisions that have not yet been revealed. The feeling of being observed, it was quiet. He was not paranoid. He was reading the atmosphere. It was something that people learn when they need to protect themselves without knowing exactly what it is. My mindset started to change again, to adapt to this new situation. I pay attention to details, which would have been irrelevant. The times, the inputs and outputs. Anyone who has access to my room, who is allowed with the exception. It was as if my mind was trying to put together a map of the invisible forces that move it around. And the forces were not of the face. They were not the right people, featured. Protocols are set. Making silent. It was the kind of impact that it does not happen in a single moment, but it's going to spread slowly, creating a different atmosphere, in a mood of anticipation. Something being set up away from my face. The most disturbing was that no one has told me anything directly. No explanation at all, no warning. No question is out of place. All remained within the normal range of the institution. And by the same token, I felt like I had a true hidden floating around, being shared between people that did not include me. The information that existed in the world, so it was clear to me, just wasn't meant to me. In a few moments, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Hospitals are strange places, and that accidents can mobilize extra care that the house is to be there. Could be just the procedure. But this is an attempt to rationalize was little. Why your body reacts before you the way of logic. And my body reacted with a strain when I noticed someone else to change their behavior because of me. I felt as if something was being protected. Not necessarily to me, but it's something that is related to me. A story to tell, a name. A past that had enough weight in order to reorganize environments for long periods of operation without the need to be spoken out loud. It was to the situation in a tone almost a conspiracy, not a fantasy, but the actual dynamics of power, and is quiet. When decisions are to be taken out of the hands of those who will be most impacted by the climate change. And I had the feeling that a change on your skin. The house is prevented to extend our points of view. When we talked, it was always with a sentence. Measures, neutral and functional. There was no coldness, but there is a restraint. and the contention is ever a sign that something is not being held tightly. I began to understand that the silence wasn't just the staff. It was part of a larger movement, an unspoken agreement. One expects to be calculated. Meanwhile, in the hospital, I followed your normal routine as if nothing was out of place. Okay, machine apitavam shifts where the guns and days. But below that surface, and I could feel the gears turning, the unseen forces adjusted, the paths to be evaluated, the consequences of being designed even before any disclosure to happen. I still don't know what I was in the game. Had no name, he had no evidence. He had no confirmation of anything. But on the journey, he had already stopped being just my physical recovery. She had made a journey to silent for the decisions that others were taking in my surroundings. And while I was trying to keep a semblance of normality, a part of me that already knew, when the whole room change could not be fully explained. It is because something important is about to spiral out of control for those who have always remained in secret. I can't tell you how long it was until I had to feel that something was going to happen, but I felt it. It was not the intuition, mystical, or exaggerated fear. That was the sum total of the small signal and of those, which will change the temperature of the air without changing the light in the room. People started to get less. The conversations in the hall became shorter and shorter. The pace of the hospital, who seemed to be the only car mechanic, he began to look carefully curated by me, as if it had been decided to reduce the noise, so that a decision could be taken in silence. I was lying down, trying to keep my mind on the spot, when I heard the footsteps firm out there. It was not in a hurry for a common course of treatment. You had a different cadence, and it shows, and I already knew who it was. The house is Robert. He walked slowly, but with a seriousness that I had never seen in him. The seriousness of the authority, but with the seriousness of someone who carries a truth that hides in your pocket. And you know that if you take it off, it all falls down. He paused at the door for a second, as if you were still deciding on whether I should go for the truth, then moved forward a few steps and stood on the side of my bed, and without touching anything, without adjusting anything, without asking what he was doing when the focus was on of my physical safety. At this time, the focus was on each other. I've noticed the way he held his shoulders firmly, by the extreme care with the face, as if he was avoiding you to miss out on anything. The emotional distance that I have been feeling proved to be right there, but with a heavier weight. It seemed to be restrained by force, and it is not only a setback. He said my name again and down, and asked me how I was doing. The question was a simple one, but it was not all over my body. I said, with the same simplicity of it, and for a moment we were on that break, uncomfortable with that. No one wants to be the first one to cross the line. I've always felt that if I were to ask, "What did you see in that chart?" I will be opening up a door that does not close anymore. And it's the way that you looked at me. He seemed to know it. It was as if he was waiting for me to ask for, or wait, that I didn't ask for. Both of these options had a significant impact. At a time when our eyes crossed, in fact, drift-free, something that I went through it. It was not novelization. It was not a tragedy. It was in recognition of the risk. That look was carrying a piece of information that do not fit in the room or in the hospital, and in my fragile state. It was a look of someone who knows too much, and that, for a moment, it almost makes this too much is shown. I've seen there's a silent struggle going on. On the one hand, a duty. On the other, it's as a result. He was inspired. He held in the air for a second, and I realized that he was about to say something. In the body, it reported. His throat made a movement to a minimum, and then he stopped back down from the inside out, has moved to a choice. This is so small, and in such a decision, it was the one that gave me the most chill of the night. Because of that gesture, I don't think the truth was not to be forgotten or ignored. She had also been postponed. And choose from and really a decision that is always to charge interest. I wish I had the courage to insist on it, but it didn't, not yet. Not in at the moment. My world was a mess too. The mindset you were being forced to grow up fast. but I was still the same person you grew up in a home where the questions were in place. And to look at it from the front led to a transformation that I did not know how to start. I felt ashamed for a second, as if I might be missing for myself. But I also felt relief at not cross this line without the overhead, because I knew that if it could speak, nothing would ever be as it was before. Robert averted his gaze for a moment, as if the contact would be too dangerous. And it was then that I saw something very rare, a trace of a conflict. The real human on the surface, he was not to blame. It was a concern. The goal of the person who understands the behind the scenes of a story that the other person is still living alone in the front. You seem to be measuring your words. You haven't said it. As if you were to choose silence to be able to avoid a crash right away. It's just that the silence doesn't collapse. It will only change the time in which it takes place. He got a little more touch me, and he spoke only what you need. Phrases, or neutral, almost careful, too. He told me I needed to rest, that the things were under control. I have heard and understood what was not said anything. It was under control. I was being held. The feeling invaded me was that I was at the center of an ancient structure, with a framework of the decisions made by others, and who now began to range, to show the cracks. When he turned around to walk away, I felt the desire to call out, to ask for, at least, a clue, anything and everything that I cook. But my voice did not come out. And maybe he would have noticed, because he stopped in the doorway. It didn't look to me right away. He was still as if he was experiencing the last chance to go back and tell the truth. Then he turned his face just enough to meet her eyes once more. It was a short look at the heavyweight final, with a look that said, "This is going to catch up to you." Not as a threat, but as an inevitable fate. The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound of that door shutting seemed to be higher than it should be. I stood there, breathing slowly, feeling the last one, the one that's always been kept in the silence. In short answers in the blank spaces, I had finally found the way to me, and the way that things were moving around, and I knew that I would not be who I would choose the moment. That's all it would prove to be. I have to tell you something in all honesty that is now inside of me. That night ended up in the hospital. None of what had happened there. He was caught between the whitewashed walls, or in charts, or in the silence that seemed to end the matter. What has been discovered that morning went through all of that. I was going to be anything on my own. Not because someone told me that directly, but because some truths don't need to be told to start acting. They have settled down. They have changed the way that we see in the mirror. Ever since Robert came out of that room, I didn't think of my father in the same way. Don't like the judgment immediately, or even how to charge later, but as a core part of something that was always out of my reach. The last name that I bore no question, the story of which I accepted it in half, and the silence that I normalize a. It all began to come to each other's weight, with a weight of which does not dissolve over time. On the contrary, increases. Because once you realize that it's part of your identity has been built on top of the choices that you don't have, your mindset will change. To go back to being who I was before. I was there, stretched out, trying to organize the thoughts that don't want to sort through. Trying to figure out the real impact of what he was drawing with no name, with no explanation. What Robert saw, it was not a small one. It was not a detail of bureaucracy. It's something that was large enough to change the behavior of the hospital, to generate decisions and quiet, to create the contentions of the people around me. And mostly, it's something that was large enough for him to decide not to talk about. In this silence, there's more than a word. Showed me just what I had been dealing with, that for a fact hidden that is not related only to the past but to the present. And what is still ahead. The most difficult thing was to accept the fact that I wasn't ready to hear it. There is a huge difference between wanting to know and be in a position to know. At that moment, I understood that the disclosure would come at once. It would break too much for me. And perhaps, Robert, you have understood it well. Or maybe he was protecting you more than me. This question is still very much alive, although he walks with me. Because of all of the decision-making in the silence, it loads more than one thing, and not all of them are needed. As the evening wore on, I realized that my journey had changed his nature. It was no longer about the physical recovery and unsurmount of an accident. He was about to face the possibility that, in my personal story, I had the scenes that I've never been invited to get to know. Behind the scenes made in the choices of old, of certain sayings. The paths are diverted away before I even had the voice for it. This is a game changer. It changes the way that you remember from childhood. How to interpret simple expressions as a means anyone who has been in control all this time. I know that when you talk about it, something in there too if you move. Why stories are not only of those who lived it. They touch on something universal in the sense that the past does not stay quiet forever. He's waiting notes, and when it is, the smaller the gap, reaches out to us with a power that you don't ignore it. So that's what happened to me. In the last he found a road, a crash, a sheriff who shouldn't be here. And he has decided to bring us closer together. If you've come this far, it's because of this story. You followed him up to the end, in the same way that it has been with me from the inside out. And when something is holding and you're like, it's not just because of curiosity, is it for the recognition? Stories like this are out there to cause reflection or to tamper with the mindset, to make us rethink the making, the silence, and truths of which they were saved a lot of time. If this is the kind of content that makes sense to you, if you subscribe to the channel, it's an easy way to keep close to the narrative that we don't deal with it all the way to the surface, which relate to the timing of the revelations, the intelligence of the listener. If you feel like it, leave a comment telling us what you scored on this history, or writing a sentence which represents how did you feel when you get to the end. At times, you put it into words. It helps you organize the things which are left to lose so much, and I read each and every comment, knowing that you have someone who is real on the other side of it. And, if you will, at some point, you have felt this silent connection that is created when a story seems to speak directly to you. Leave a like on the video. It's a simple gesture, but one that shows that the exchange happened, and that is that the conversation is well worth it. Right now, there's a video right here on the side, which complements this subject and zooms in all of this. We ended up living together. Click and keeps me there as well.